But one day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment.
And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The newest show sensation streaming throughout the multiverse. Your hang place in cyberspace for paranormal news and views. Taboo Topics with Gene Broida.
Welcome, everyone, to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida. I'm your host, Gene Broida, also known as Lightworker 111, beaming to you from sea to shining sea across the Americas and the world every Sunday night between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States on my Taboo Topics YouTube channel and at tabootopics.life/shows and simulcast by the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. Panelists on Taboo Topics with Gene Broida share news articles about paranormal events, conspiracies, and other hush-hush subjects that we all explore and probe further before moving on to the next taboo topic. On today's show, I am thrilled to introduce my two guest panelists, the inimitable Chip Reichenthal, lifelong, basically, paranormal researcher, and he's an on-air personality to boot. We also have the wonderful Debbie Ziegelmeyer, another longtime paranormal investigator and MUFON leader, Mutual UFO Network. In alphabetical order, Chip Reichenthal, please introduce yourself to our viewers.
Well, thank you there, Gene. Great to be with you again. Gene has been on two radio shows that I'm on. We've had the honor of having Gene with us, so returning the favor, if you will. Yes, life 40 years looking into paranormal, afterlife sciences, metaphysics, UFOs, extraterrestrials, that sort of thing. Trying to get an answer to the mysteries, and ultimately found that looking at the love-based side of these dark arts and sciences is about as taboo as we can get. Like Gene said, I do like probing, as long as we're talking about taboo stuff. I got my Red Bull and my cigarettes, because I'm just going to be all nasty like that. I'm a published author. I have a book called Even the Dead Won't Tell You the Truth. It's kind of a first-person narrative of spirit mediumship, but in the guise of a fictional murder mystery, which is kind of neat. Something you can't find anywhere else and nobody's read. Even the Dead Won't Tell You the Truth. Best book you'll never read. Available on Amazon. And I do host a radio show called Kindness Beyond the Veil. It's on 3 radio networks, including Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, United Public Radio Network, which is formerly UFO Paranormal Network, and Paranormal Junkyard Radio. It's Monday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern on and 9 p.m. Eastern on WCETFM.com and ParanormalJunkyardRadio.com, and on the Paranormal Radio app via TalkStream Live. And I co-host a show Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 9 Eastern. That's a good time slot, isn't it, Gene? Because we're here 7 to 9 Eastern as we speak on a Sunday with her taboo topics. Supernatural Realm. I co-host a show with my friend Tim Roxbury. It's really his show, Supernatural Realm, Tuesdays and Thursdays. WCETFM paranormaljunkyardradio.com, and on the Paranormal Radio app, and syndicated over to United Public Radio. Boy, that's a full skip.
Mouthful. Well done, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. Honored to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for gracing these hallowed halls. Debbie Ziegelmeyer, what brings you to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida, other than my personal invitation? Tell us about yourself.
You're muted.
I'm muted?
Debbie, go ahead and start over. I'm sorry, I didn't muted you during the introduction. My bad.
You can do that.
Mea culpa.
I'm the Missouri MUFON State Director. I'm also a member of the MUFON Business Board of Directors. And also a scuba instructor in what little bit of spare time that I have, along with my son-in-law and my daughter. We teach scuba diving here in Missouri in the summertime. And also
All right.
And I'm your host, Gene Broida, a lifelong UFO researcher myself, parapsychologist, and also an author. My book and ebook is called Unknown Objects, the Top 10 U.S. UFO Cases. And these top 10 cases, which go chronologically from the end of World War II with the Foo Fighter reports that the servicemen brought back home, through the Phoenix Lights of 1997, will help you understand why you must be crazy not to believe in UFOs and their alien occupants. So I write daily articles for thedailyconspiracy.com and survival.update and several other good magazines online that do require research and shallow and deep dives both. I have a background in computer science with an advanced degree, undergraduate degrees in psychology and education. And all my life, my adult life, I've been a practicing mystic, specializing in tarot cards and astrology. So I'm all over the board. And I'm not the only one, because a growing number of truth seekers and starseeds are waking up in consciousness to question the emotional impact that this sweeping decades-long official cover-up we've had over every single paranormal topic over 7 decades. What has this had on society? A tremendous impact. And we're living in these remarkable times where never as before, light workers are awakening to these universal truths, and we're finding each other in numbers untold. And everyone here assembled today hopes you out there in viewer land will enjoy tonight's show, depending on where you are in the world and the multiverse, as we shed light in the dark corners of reality as we know it. And so now, let's begin talking about taboo topics. And I am happy to lead off the events with an article I happen to have written. This was published in the dailyconspiracy.com, and I'm reproducing it here with kind permission. Thank you very much. This was published a little over a year ago, January 4th, 2019. I'm only going to read. The title is Lawsuit Proves Rendlesham UFO Case. And as I say, this is part 1 of part 2. So here we go. This is about Britain's Roswell UFO incident in Rendlesham Forest, and a recent extraterrestrial happened there. A paid debunker and self-appointed UFO expert in Britain has just revealed that an anonymous British source told him that no UFO landed in Rendlesham Forest, and that all the U.S. military witnesses lied about it. Yet a lawsuit brought by one of the witnesses, a U.S. serviceman, found that his congestive heart failure was the direct result of radioactive poisoning from close contact with a landed UFO, and a medical payout was court-ordered. The famous Rendlesham Forest UFO event has been covered extensively by many qualified and credible researchers. There is so much evidence that supports testimony given by multiple eyewitnesses that one has to wonder what or who has prompted the so-called British X-Files expert, Dr. David Clarke, to go public with a classic debunking cover story. For those unfamiliar with the Rendlesham Forest incident, it began with a series of reported sightings of unexplained lights in Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, England, in late December 1980, just outside the Royal Air Force Woodbridge base, used at the time by the U.S. Air Force. Events unfolded near 2 former military bases. That would be RAF Bentwaters north of the forest, and RAF Woodbridge, which extends into the forest from the west and is bounded by the forest on its northern and eastern edges. Over the course of 3 nights, from December 26th through December 28th, 1980. U.S. military personnel were stationed at both bases at the time. Wing Commander Colonel Gordon E. Williams was responsible for both bases. Colonel Ted Conrad was base commander, and Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Halt was his deputy. Halt's first-hand account of his experience leading a team to investigate the strange lights spotted visually and on radar during the second night of sightings are detailed and convincing. Lieutenant Colonel Halt submitted an official military memo with his incredible testimony. At about 3 a.m. on December 26th, a security patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge saw, quote, a strange glowing object, metallic in appearance, with colored lights, unquote. Frenzied nearby farm animals. They saw a landed craft that left, quote, 3 impressions or depressions in the ground that were visible the next day, unquote. Sergeant James Peniston said he walked up to the UFO, touched its warm surface, and copied the numerous symbols on its body. After midnight, 2 nights later, Lieutenant Colonel Halt led several servicemen with radiation detectors back to the same spot. The group of trained observers saw more strange lights. Halt later submitted a tape recording he made on the scene and an affidavit to his commanders in addition to his memo. Quoting again, "I believe the objects that I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United Kingdom and the United States have attempted, both then and now, to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham Forest and RAF Bentwaters by the use of well-practiced methods of disinformation." Unquote. Military sources quickly scrambled for lights that darted around the skies near the Bentwaters and Rendlesham RAF bases. They announced that the highly competent servicemen had mistaken a nearby lighthouse for a UFO. Halt disagreed in his affidavit. Quote, "While in Rendlesham Forest, our security team observed a light that looked like a large eye, red in color, moving through the trees. After a few minutes, this object began dripping something that looked like molten metal. A short while later, it broke into several smaller, white-colored objects which flew away in all directions. Claims by skeptics that this was merely a sweeping beam from a distant lighthouse are unfounded. We could see the unknown light and the lighthouse simultaneously." To 40 degrees off where all of this was happening, unquote. U.S. Air Force police officer John Burroughs was stationed at Bentwaters and was part of the investigative squad led by Lieutenant Colonel Halt. Both Burroughs and Peniston walked right up to the glowing object that lit up the forest gloom. Burroughs developed congestive heart failure after the incident, which he attributed to radiation poisoning from close proximity to the UFO. A British Ministry of Defense document confirmed this theory. With the help of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and U.S. Senator John McCain's office, Burroughs won a lawsuit in 2015 that claimed the veteran's medical condition was the direct result of exposure to UFO radiation. He was granted full medical disability. Burroughs issued a press release titled U.S. Government's De facto Acknowledgement of the Existence of UFOs that underscored the ufological significance of the legal decision. Quote, "In January of 2000, years of exhaustive efforts, the VA settled in full with me. I needed someone to champion my cause, someone not afraid to put themselves at risk to help me. I was lucky. I found two to champion my cause. My attorney, Pat Frasconia, and Senator John McCain and his staff. Through their efforts, I received life-saving heart surgery to replace a badly shredded and anterior mitral valve caused by the UAP radiation, that's the UFO, and a settlement from the DoD, Department of Defense, and VA, Veterans Administration, admitting I was injured in the line of duty in December of 1980, unquote. Now that's the end of part one. And part two explores this British debunker and also talks a little bit more about the legal significance that this lawsuit demonstrates. And what's interesting is that most people have never heard of this. They may have heard of Bentwaters and Rendlesham Forest back in 1980. Something happened over there, UFO stuff, right? But almost no one that I know, even UFO researchers, understand that the military made a settlement with a former serviceman injured in the line of duty made a medical payout. This is all on the record. This is not made up. This is a proof that something emitted radiation, and these guys were close enough to become poisoned by it. So when I see stories like this, my head just starts to swim a little bit, because we've been drilled and drilled and drilled all my lifetime, certainly. You must be crazy to believe in UFOs. And it's very clear that military governments all over the world understand this is a real, genuine phenomenon. There are real, genuine aliens. We don't necessarily know what they're up to, but they're around. They have advanced technologies that emit radiations that can be harmful to humans at close proximity. And by the way, there's a lot more to the Rendlesham story in terms of what Peniston and Halt and other people involved with this experience. This wasn't merely a sighting. There was the close encounter where they actually laid hands on the craft and they saw the hieroglyphics and were writing them down, and then subsequently had binary data downloads that were they repeated and repeated until they got written down, and other experiencers have talked about that too. So at this point, I'd like to open our round table and see what my esteemed guests, Debbie Ziegelmeyer and Chip Reichenthal, have to think about Rendlesham, government cover-ups, military service people hurt investigating or around UFOs, who have trouble getting medical payouts because this phenomenon supposedly doesn't exist. Just take it away. What do you think?
I want that lawyer. That's all I got to say about that. You know, Debbie's more of an expert on this sort of, she's a MUFON lady, you know, but I want that lawyer, because I'll tell you what, you know, I have a doctor that said, Chip, you know, you've got this horrible pain condition. I want you to go to disability and apply for disability. And with a boatload of results, you know, from my doctor, it wasn't enough to prove crap. But this guy could somehow, in a court of law, prove that he got a heart condition from something that even the government says doesn't exist. That's all I got to say about that. To prove that you got this heart, this valve, mitral valve, was it?
Mitral valve, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Mitral. M-I-T-R-A-L?
Yeah. But to prove that,
I know.
From a source of radiation that the government says doesn't exist, the media says doesn't exist, the people that are discredited, you know, to say it does exist look like idiots because the government and the media are discrediting them, and yet in a court of law, this guy gets full bank for a heart condition from a UFO. I want that.
I'm hip.
That's my comment on that. You know, this
it's
is a
very
famous
nice
case. We're aware of the case, but I wasn't aware of that.
Very
and
nice.
That's the word of Gene Broida. Go ahead.
Very nice of a U.S. senator to step up and then to pitch for a veteran.
Right. Yeah. That's, you know, he should have gotten more respect, you know, when he passed. That's all I have to say about that.
What do you think, Debbie?
Well, first of all, they had Senator John Glenn, correct, was involved in this, and so the moment this thing became public, the nature of our government is pay him off, hush it up, get it out of the news media. You know, he could have drugged this on in court, and it was better off to just go on ahead. You know, I met Lou Elizondo. He came to one of our board meetings. He spoke. Lou was the CIA agent, former CIA agent, who's has a TV show out now, and I think we're going more and more in the direction of some type of disclosure. Our government is starting to admit a lot, especially with the president coming out saying we have a space force, which, by the way, we've had since 1952, that Eisenhower established. We just admitted to the fact. And if you want to find books on it, go online, our government books, a government book website, and they have old manuals that you can buy, and they're selling for next to nothing. As far as that, yeah, he had a heart condition. He's a veteran. You have a senator involved. Sure. You know, and as far as the incident not happening, there's so much evidence, so many books out. I met Jim Peniston a few months ago. He's supposed to be one of my Skype speakers for my meeting, and he was telling me about the ones and the zeros, that when he actually touched the craft, that he had these binary ones and zeros going through his head. He took a book and just wrote it all down, and I believe it was oh, it was a few years later, he finally went under hypnotism and um, was he realized what they were trying to tell him was basically he was an interpreter, is what all these ones and zeros were. So that there's so much documentation on this, and the interpreter, by the way, is there's they're taking they need something from us to regenerate the future, us in the future. But yeah, I think it was a good call on the government's part to a senator that's a credible senator that's that sides with the veteran, and it's about time somebody stood up for our veterans. So yes.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I saw a show about that. That the binary codes.
Yeah.
They reprogrammed something like 2017 or something. It was relatively recently, and the message included that we are watching over you. It was kind of not a threatening thing, but more of a kind thing, and they had directions, not directions, but coordinates that linked up to a sunken island off the coast of Northern Ireland, I think.
Yeah, and I used to know that. It's out in the ocean somewhere, a sunken island. But I mean, I spoke with Jim and if Peniston, and when you meet these gentlemen in person, and I met Colonel Hawk too at a conference, but Jim, I sat and had time with him, spent time with him. I wanted to buy his book, and when I spoke at this conference in Illinois a few months ago, he only brought, I think it was 15 or 20 books with him because he said they're really thick, and I wanted him to speak for my meeting. So I said, well, I'll buy a book when you Skype in for my meeting or when you drive out. He only lives in 4-hour drive away from where I live. So he's in Rockford, Illinois, and hopefully I can get him to come out and visit us. But he was quiet. He autographed his books, but he didn't want to speak. He seemed like a little shy. He's not a showboater. He wasn't somebody that's out here that's making this up. He doesn't like being in the limelight, but then again, he's got to defend himself. And the more that this is researched, I know Peter Robbins had a book out, Nick Pope had a book out. Jim's actually got a book out. I wrote that down here somewhere, but Jim's got, I think, his new book out. I wanted to make sure. Let's see, it's called The Rendlesham Enigma. And
as in Rendlesham, not
Rendlesham Enigma. So his book, I believe, it just came out a few months ago.
It's been 1980. That's 40 years ago. It's been 40 years since that happened,
and
it was a big deal, and it still is. So the debunker, by the way, in England, was paid undoubtedly to write a full-page article in a British newspaper saying that British paratroopers were pulling a prank in revenge for pranks that had been pulled on them by American servicemen in England. Okay, so the Yanks and the Brits don't always get along, right? Friendly rivalry, that sort of thing. Maybe not always so friendly, but in any event, the story that this guy spun, which I'm sure is utter balderdash, is that these British airmen decided to pull a prank on the Americans, and they paratrooped in, and they had helicopters, and they were responsible for all of this stuff that happened. There's just no way. And yet the British press gave this debunker a full page of space. The article that I just read, why doesn't that get a full page of space in a British newspaper or an American newspaper? Shouldn't be fringe, in my opinion. These topics that are taboo, they need to come out. That's why we light workers are shining light in the dark corners of perception and knowledge, because enough is enough already. Come on, people. What if the last 70 years we'd spent getting ready to receive ETs among us? Because in my opinion, and many people also believe, they've been here all the while. They probably created us, almost certainly. And many of them are well disposed toward us, or at least tolerant. Others not so much. Apparently, the Rendlesham Forest ETs were not hostile, at least. In fact, not that many of them seem to be hostile, at least none that I hear about much. Not to say that there are people who haven't had negative abduction experiences, there are plenty of them. But just as we study livestock or wild animals, and thinking of wild animals, Forest Service, we tag and track animals, maybe this is what they're doing to us. I've certainly heard that as a theory. I've heard it as told to an experiencer, but you hear lots of things. And as a skeptic, we have to keep open minds without being gullible, in my opinion. But I'm thrilled, Debbie, that you're meeting all these people, and I hope someday I can meet them too, because if you want the true story, you go to the source, right?
Well, and like Stanton Friedman, bless his heart, like he used to say, he said the Undertaker is catching up with everybody. You know, especially with Roswell. It's been 70 years. And little by little by little, all the witnesses from that are dying off. That's a shame.
I was writing about Cape Girardeau in Missouri, 1941 UFO crash, one of the first known or that leaked to the public in the United States. And at the time, it was pretty clear that the U.S. military was not adept at getting to the scene and getting everything cleaned up, and they were setting new protocols about all this. But it's just been so long that it's been lie, and cover up, and now the government would have egg on its face to admit 70 years of lies. It's probably not going to happen. As Debbie pointed out, we've had there's a branch of the Air Force that's been working with NASA all along. You know, we've been sending people to the moon. NASA gets very high profile, but the Space Command of the U.S. Air Force didn't ever get much publicity that I ever heard all my life. And yet now they have evolved into the new American sixth branch of the military, the Space Force. And people active in the Air Force Space Command were just segued into the new Space Force. This is all happening steadily. And a lot of people are writing about, will Trump be the UFO disclosure president? It's a nice pipe dream, but I doubt it. I don't think the powers that control the U.S. government will ever allow a candid disclosure. But people are finding out on their own. And Lou Elizondo, he was the one who disclosed the Tic Tac event, wasn't he?
Well, kind of. He that was released, but he's the one that's pretty much been on TV explaining it. I think he's been on just about everybody's TV show explaining it.
Right. And do you think he's legitimate?
Yeah, I met him. He's a pretty cool. He's a great guy. I don't know. He seems smart. I didn't say seems smart. He is smart. He's very intelligent. He presents himself as just one of the good old boys. We got in a conversation about our Jeeps. He doesn't dress the part of a scientist, but when you talk to him, the man's brilliant. He, he was a speaker. I do believe it was 2017 at the Bouffon Symposium for our banquet, and he just started spouting figures. I mean, somebody was asking him something, and just off the top of his head, mathematical figures and theories, and I mean, the man is really brilliant, and I think he's a good asset to us in ufology to have somebody out there up front. You know, CIA is always going to be CIA, but at least they're making a beginning. You've got to start someplace, and I appreciate the fact that he's coming out, that our government is finally admitting, okay, we've got these 3, I think it's 5 tapes so far, 3 that have been released, and I think there's another couple ones that are coming. But at least there's somebody out there. They're admitting, yes, there is something. They're letting our Navy and now our Navy and I guess Air Force now are both. They are allowed to report something that's unknown, unidentified craft. Whether or not they're going to keep making it public is yet to be seen. But at least what a lot of us have been doing for the past 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years since Roswell, trying to get the truth out. At least it's verifying some of what we've known all along. But there's been people from other worlds visiting us for centuries. You go back to the Sumerians. I mean, this has been going on for 3,000-4,000 years. Look at some of the stuff that's written on pictoglyphs, and it's out there.
Oh, it is. I write a lot about the Anunnaki and human origin. It's a passion of mine, because when I was in school, I knew that the way that the teachers were told to teach history and human origin was just wrong. Just wrong. The people who built the pyramids did not have a primitive mentality. They couldn't have done that with a primitive mentality. And yet we were supposed to believe they were pounding the earth with sticks. Thinking about Monty Python. And that's actually a quote from some ancient, English text about how the peasants did. But point being that, yes, there's been this consistent denial, and people who've done no research at all on UFOs will tell you, I don't believe in them. Well, I don't believe in them either. I know my government knows they exist. I keep beating this drum because this is the way to get conversations going. It's not about belief. It's about proof, and proof can be a document by the CIA, the FBI, some other alphabet letter organization in the federal government, talking in a meeting that's classified about aerial phenomena, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, UFOs, flying saucers. We got it a lot in the media now. Talking about popular culture, movies and TV shows. This is a huge trendy subject now, and thankfully, but the official posturing of the United States now seems to be the craft are real enough, but the occupants, nah. That any triangle craft or craft capable of maneuvers where it's flying along and all of a sudden it does a right angle, it just stops, and this kind of thing, as opposed to curves and what a conventional aircraft can do. This is the real deal, and now the servicemen can at least vent their spleens, as it were, because imagine the psychological pressure of knowing what you saw and being prohibited from talking about it. And that's why people are doing deathbed confessions too. Witnesses are saying, look, I couldn't talk about it before now, but I'm in my final hours. I might as well confess because the American public has the right to know.
Well,
don't they, Chip?
What's really crazy too is that people will say, I believe in flying saucers, but I don't believe there's aliens. And so I'll say, well, okay, so who built the flying saucer? Well, I don't know, but it's being run by remote control. Well, who's got the remote control? I mean, they can't wrap their brain around that there's somebody else beside human beings. It's go to a very, very dark area, out in the middle of nowhere on a new moon and look up at the sky and try and tell yourself and make yourself believe that we're the only ones in this whole massive, and that's just our solar system, just massive universe, and we're it? I don't think so.
What bemuses me is math geeks who show statistically the improbability of being alone in the universes when there's nothing wrong with that, but you look at a lot of first-person testimony saying, hey, I worked with them. I went to work, I was a contractor on a black op, and I show up my first day, and there's a guy of lieutenant grade, basically. I have to take orders from him, and he's not from around here. At first it's very upsetting, but it's your job. This is your colleague, and everybody says you get used to it. I guess if you didn't get used to it, you wouldn't be long with the job, right? But they've signed a contract, the money's good, they want to finish it. It's all highly compartmentalized, and nobody's talking because they sign papers that say if you talk, your life is in peril, your career is in peril, maybe your credit, your identity is in peril, and your family is in peril. So there's people are like, where's the proof? There's plenty of proof if you know where to look for it. And the CIA is releasing proof, thousands and thousands of documents.
Wasn't it in 1979 when Burroughs joined the military and they couldn't find his records? Of his 1982, they couldn't go back. That was why the lawsuit. They had to go back and actually say, okay, now we've got your records. that you were in the military in 82, that you weren't in the military in 80. He goes, I was in the military in 79. But they did finally admit that he was in the military, but they still won't go back and release those records. They still kept that secret.
Wow.
But they can erase you just snap of a finger.
Oh yeah, they can. Wasn't it Bob Lazar who was erased as well?
Bob Lazar, Stanton Friedman did find his name in a phone book in Nevada. And he said, well, let me keep that in my gray file. But yeah, he was pretty much erased. And then now, you know.
Is this the gray file?
Yeah, yeah. Well, he had a separate file. But now everything that Bob Lazar was telling us about, you know, now we've got, you know, it's all coming, you know, it's out there now. It's out in the public.
Chip, you're familiar with Bob Lazar, aren't you?
No, actually. I mean, I've heard the name. I haven't met him.
Yeah,
so...
he says he worked at, wasn't it Area 51 basically, or somewhere like Dreamland, somewhere where they stash UFOs, crashed UFOs, and want to reverse engineer them. And he was led down a series of hangars at this top secret base after being flown in hush hush with other contractors. He was led to something like 8 hangars in a row, and he ended up working on one specific craft he called the sports model, or the Sportster, as I recall. And he could draw this thing. He got back into the public eye about a year ago, and he can draw these designs like a drafter. He's done this so many times. He's so practiced, and his hand is so sure. Personally, I can't draw a stick figure, but this guy is impeccable engineering schematics basically, and he's drawing this thing as he's talking. You know, he's done this so many times. What he says and the way he says it ring true to me. And he also says, I really don't care if you believe me or not. This is my truth, and I'm presenting it to you. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I tend to take it.
The beautiful thing that I've seen through all the people that I've interviewed and all the scientists and physicists that were absolutely cynics, skeptics, you know, don't even want to hear about this kind of stuff, and have these kinds of experiences, and that includes people from the military and the government, suddenly are born again to become some of the most eloquent speakers on these topics that you could possibly ask for and imagine. You know, worked a lot of events through the years, and you know, even though mostly paranormal, you get people coming up to you and sharing their stories with you about the UFO sightings or ET contact, and it's palpable to them. You see them actually relive it. Some of the documentaries I've seen that include people like Bob Lazar, you know, if they have a chance to tell their stories without somebody shutting them up or discrediting them on the spot, you know, I mean, they cry. There's palpable emotion there. They relive these things, and it's one thing to experience it, but you know, and whether you believe in these things or not, just imagine that you had some sort of sighting or some sort of contact. Who do you tell? You know, do you go to your mom and dad? Do you go to your brother and sister, your wives or husbands, your neighborhood buddies, your drinking pals? You know, I mean, who do you talk to about this? It's a tremendous social risk, even on, you know, this micro level between people in your own social community. You know, so it gives a lot to think about. But you see the Bob Lazars, you know, or the Jim Penistons or of the world, and you see so many of these things after a while, you know, especially from a radio host point of view, somebody curious that is actively looking for answers. You see a lot of similarities to an awful lot of these stories about sightings, about contact experiences, you know, about government or military cover-ups, you know, about disclosure or not disclosure. But the subjective kind of experiences that these people have had, and imagine, again, Who do you talk to if something like that happens to you, and how do you handle it? There's a lot of things in common from people, all different corners of the world, all different professions, ages, beliefs, lifestyles, and a lot of things that are very common to these experiences. So I will say that.
True, 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 true. And on that note, let us pass on to your article, Chip Reichenthal. And by the way, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida. I'm your host, Gene Broida, joined tonight on this paranormal roundtable of news and views with my illustrious guests, Debbie Ziegelmeyer and Chip Reichenthal. And now, Chip, what have you got for us?
Well, I brought a little article. I guess since we're getting into taboo topics, I've got one. I've got a real nasty, dirty one for you. It's called Kindness. Ah! You know what they say about nice guys, first of all, right? Yeah, well, not this nice guy. But anyway, I am going to bring a little paranormal to the round table. And this is an article that was published in Supernatural magazine from yours truly. And it is called Chipism in Print. I have an introductory segment in my radio shows. I nicknamed them Chipisms, but this was for the purpose of a magazine. It's called The Kinder Side of Afterlife Science. So I'm just going to read it straight out. Good thing it's a 2-hour show, I guess, Chief. There have been some great benefits to doing radio shows about paranormal topics, especially in this day and age when it's easier to talk about these things. I've had the great fortune of interviewing many of the top minds and talents in the paranormal industry, and it allows radio hosts to have their finger on the pulse of that community. We are the proverbial fly on the wall. We get to see shifts in popular theory, who is warring with whom and why. It also allows the greatest convenience of all, which is a personal platform of our own. For the most part, the luxury of hosting a paranormal radio show has been a boon for me because I like many, if not most of the people in paranormal. The luxury, then, is that if I do my job well, I can be the one they call upon if they have something to promote. Even more so if it's something of personal importance to them, a new theory of theirs, or progress on an existing theory of theirs, perhaps a pet project they had, or really great news, where good things happen for good people. You see folks who went from little to no recognition to stardom. See the little guy have his day or the little lady have hers. Or as an audience with their heroes. Perhaps someone has their work recognized. And sometimes you see the opposite, when they lose the brass ring, even though they were great at what they did. You see the bad side of fame too, or see people who are in it for the wrong reasons. I bet King can nod her head about that. For me, my biggest hope is twofold. I don't care about fame personally, but would like to have the power to help others. And so I want to be the one they ask when they have things to promote. And yet, I do have a platform important to me, and if I can be known for it, that's fine too. In order to understand that platform, I suppose I should share some things about why it came about in the first place. Among the most common questions to ask guests on radio shows is how or why one gets started in the paranormal realm. Most people in the realm truly come into it from a place of fear. Someone or something grabbed them or called out their name or tried pushing them down a flight of stairs. If not them, somebody they knew or loved. Rarely does it seem as though they chose ghosts. It's usually more like ghosts chose them. After all, if they themselves are not inclined to believe, then something mighty profound would have to happen. There is something that goes through you when you see stuff move across a room on its own. It changes you, changes the way you look at the world. It's nothing like what your parents told you, or teachers, friends, church leaders. I came into the realm from a loving place, and it has had tremendous impact on my outlook. It was my best friend who brought me into the realm, yet not the way most best friends would. I know people who joined a paranormal team because their buddies got them to join, but that's not the thing here. My best friend came to me at the moment of his death, and let's just say that got my curiosity going. Back in 1979, long before it was cool to talk about ghosts or casually mention you talk to dead people, I had my first encounter with death. Not mine, obviously. It was my best buddy who grew up next door to me. We moved into the neighborhood when I was 2 years old. I met him then, and we were inseparable. inseparable since, pretty much, from then on. We rarely fought or competed. It didn't matter who was bigger or had more things. It was a week before my 21st birthday when I first heard about it. He was in a horrible accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit him head on. But he was on a motorcycle and thrown into that car head first. He was alive when I heard about it, and he was down in Florida. I was in upstate New York. He was brain dead. He kept alive with respirators. Eventually, his parents had to fly down to Florida and make the toughest choice of their lives. They had to unplug him to bring an ultimate peace and end to his. I'm sure they were not, in their minds, certain that they did the right thing. I was. I knew it was the right choice, the right thing for them to do, but only because he had told me. One night, about a week after I heard the news, I went out late at night onto a swing set in my parents' backyard. I had some beers, set out to that swing set to try to wrap my head around how to process this. It's hard to grieve somebody who's not dead, but it's also hard not to grieve somebody who'd never have use of their mind again. This particular night was, aside from the night to process all this, also the eve of my birthday. And as the evening turned midnight, was my birthday, and therefore my birthday party. As the beers went down, I had an ever-present calm, which something changed. The swing next to me changed. There was this energy on that swing set next to me. To this day, I can't explain it. It was as though I sensed a change of some sort in that swing next to me. There was something or someone on that swing. It was as if I saw without seeing or heard without hearing. I mean, the swing did move a little. I did have conversations in my head talking to him during this odd, really long week. I had dialogue with him, but it was my inner voice that spoke to me as him in those conversations. But here, now, with this swing next to me, somehow different, it was not my inner voice speaking for him, and what he said was something I would never in my wildest imaginings even think to say. I had asked this energy, or whatever it was, on the swing next to me, if there was anything or anyone there. It answered back. It was him. He wished me a happy birthday. He said he came for another reason, too. He said he wanted to give up and came for my blessing. My inner dialogue wouldn't have said that. I was more taken aback by that than I was with the thought of talking to my friend. I then asked what the hell he meant by what he just said. Well, he explained he could not have any hope of being functional again. He really was, through the years, a very independent sort. He'd run away from home a few times, always consciously made efforts to be self-sufficient. He liked that. Here he was, he said, unable to feed himself, think for himself, speak, change himself, bathe, walk, any of that. There was no chance he'd ever again be able to do any of that. And he wanted out. He thought it reasonable to want out, and he had come for my blessing. And even though he was independent, it was still important for him to have my blessing. So here he was, asking me on my birthday for my blessing. And being the good friend I was, and in recognition of his will to independence, naturally I tried to talk him out of it. Hang in there, I said. They'll find a way to make you better, I said. Strong survive, I said. Fight to live, I said. Then he again made his point and asked what I would do if I were to come down and visit him. What would I say to him? What would I do during the visit? Feed him some Jell-O? Bathe him? Once he put it in terms of me in his shoes, so to speak, it sunk in. So I agreed with him, gave him my blessing. I thanked him, suddenly moved by the gesture, told him I loved him and I'd really miss him. I even asked him if perhaps he could visit after. He said he would try, if he could, to visit after. He also really thanked me for giving him my blessing and understanding why he would want it. And then, just like that, he was gone. The energy of that swing next to me went back to simply being an empty swing next to me, as it always had been before. About 10 minutes later, by then around 3 in the morning, my mother comes out of the house, all the way back of the yard to where the swing set was. I've known my mother all my life. She's never up that late, let alone out of the house at this hour. She came up to me and told me that my buddy's parents had just called from Florida. They had done the tough thing. They pulled the plug on him about 10 minutes ago. They wanted me to be the first to know. It occurred to me in that very moment that I had audience with my best friend, my first soulmate, at the very moment of his death. His parents, not sure if they had done the good thing, the right thing, did not have the peace of knowing what I knew, that they gave him exactly what he most desired. I also gave him something he most desired in my blessing to him. Yet I had the comfort of knowing that, and it may have been, in a very odd way, the best birthday gift ever. He has visited me since. I saw him when my daughter was born. I saw him at my wedding. I've seen him at random moments throughout my adult life. There was another encounter I had with my wife's father a year after his passing, and perhaps we'll talk about that some other time. The point of this story and the mention of wife's dad is to convey that my introduction to the paranormal was a loving one. It also helps to explain the platform of which I speak in my introduction to y'all here. I really want to see a respect for the dead in this paranormal realm. There is some of it, perhaps more and more by the day, but there is also this need, especially in the entertainment side of things here, to ramp up a fear element. It's good for ratings. In movies about ghosts, it's imperative to have a fear element. Since TV shows are somewhat of a transition from movies and dealing with ghosts or spirits or discarnates, it almost requires there to be some fear involved. It is an unknown, after all. We don't know what ghosts really are, if they really are anything, and we fear the unknown. In some circles, it's almost law to think that there are invisible things lurking about them. There must be evil in them. Just because we cannot see these energies, there must be there to jam us up, scare us, taunt us, and make our lives miserable. There are demonologists, exorcists, people who specialize in malevolent hauntings, churches that insist any energy representing an afterlife is evil or sinful and very least unnatural. There are investigators that purposely taunt energies thought ghosts, and if it happens on TV, the ratings go up. And who am I to say that all these people are wrong? Naturally, I don't know any better than anyone else. I've spent 40 plus years in study of what happened with my buddy visiting me. I've had some success both as a paranormalist and a spirit medium. I have studied these things. I have hosted radio shows and studied these things, written a book, published author, actor, activist, lecturer, studied quantum physics, psychology, parapsychology, know several renowned experts, talents, celebrities in these realms. But in truth, I know no more than anyone else except to ask this. If you do want to do paranormal research or investigations, or know others that do, if you know or own property thought to have paranormal energy, or ever come into any type of contact with anything you think could be a ghost or ghostly presence, then please treat it with respect. Think that perhaps these were people who lived lives, loved others, and gained wisdom. Think that perhaps they're worthy of the same kind of respect we hope to be granted as people. Treat them as you would want to be treated. If you know of any spirit mediums or psychics, perhaps see if these people in their practice deal in kind and loving ways. Even in physics, where we all break down the world to the smallest of things, like atoms, each and every atom has a purpose, a function, a value. Why then shouldn't we? Why then shouldn't they? Dead or alive, there is an energy. We can't see electricity or gravity or microwaves or radio waves, but we don't think evil of any of that. And perhaps we've not caught up to the type of science that can explain away ghosts. In the meantime, please, if you have any kind of encounter with something paranormal, please be kind. And that's my article.
Well, that's an excellent piece of prose there, sir. I congratulate you. I love the part where you said it was the best birthday gift ever.
Yeah, in the weirdest way,
That
it really
got
was.
me.
Yeah, to this day, that it gets me too. I still see him, from time to time, and it pushed me into a completely different world.
How old were you when that happened?
it was the eve of my 21st birthday. So, and at that age, I think it's fair to say, you know, I didn't realize that he was my first soulmate ever. You don't think about those sort of things, I think, at that young age, where we're invincible and chasing the sun, you know. But it was, and the honor of that contact really didn't hit me until he had, in that moment, put, you know, his perspective in my shoes. And that's something I've carried with me as contact, or let's say non-human intelligence, you know, extraterrestrials, angels, fairies, ghosts, spirits, whatever. Once you try to see things from the shoes of this interdimensional thing, everything becomes much more fair. And people don't all automatically assume that there must be bad. Been on so many investigations where somebody walks through this kind of this energy. It's almost fluffy and it's a little warmer or cooler than normal and staticky, and they go, "Oh, there must be something bad here." You know, why? I just always have to be bad. You know? I have never had a negative encounter with the spirit in 40 years of looking into this. You know, I've been doing paranormal investigating since the 80s. All we had was Polaroid cameras. You know, it takes 45 seconds for the picture to manifest before you even know if you took a good picture or not. You know? And throughout about not one negative encounter. Not one. So there is a perspective there. And I have seen beautiful, loving, benevolent things happen on investigations, not just in my circle, but with others. And countless times where these communications were misinterpreted as malicious when there really wasn't any malice. It was the fear talking. And like anything that you investigate, Gene, if you look through things with a lens of fascination rather than a lens of fear, there's an in from that visage.
And some people think that because of that, ETs approach children, because children don't have this rigid belief system that you must be crazy, blah, 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 blah. You know, children are read fairy stories. They're encouraged to use their imaginations and explore fantasy. So they don't have these rigid mental constructs that can't allow for something paranormal.
Yeah, they don't have grown-ups around them saying, "Don't do that, don't believe that, don't even encounter that," you know. So that there's that too. I keep telling people in this day and age, no matter what age, you know, envision yourself through the eyes and mind of a 7-year-old, where everything's magical, you know, and you'll see that people that are getting on your nerves are gifts to you. You know, you'll see so much.
Debbie, ghosts.
Yeah, Debbie.
Wow. Presences, malefics versus benefics. How do you weigh in?
Yeah, I was on an investigation in Hooper, Colorado. We were at Zapata Falls, my brother Chuck Zukowski and I. He had driven all the way there. He was tired, and his daughter Ashley was in the back seat of the Jeep. And so the two of them slept, and I stayed awake with the video camera going. We were trying to catch some mysterious lights in this area. It was sand dunes. And I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned around, and there was what looked like a lumberjack. The guy had curly hair, I had plaid shirt. He was staring in the window at me, confused. And I looked over, and I shook my head, and I looked. I thought, I'm awake, and I could see this guy looking at me confused. And shook my head really hard, and then he was gone. So I was expecting to see a UFO, was expecting to see mysterious lights. The park rangers had told us to watch out for grizzly bears because they'd been seen in the area. Instead, I saw a ghost. So what do you do? I said, why didn't you wake me up? And I said, well, Eventually, we did see the lights we were looking for, and it ended up being somebody was there in the sand dunes, and they were setting off Roman candles during a no fire alert, and we got those on videotape. So that night, I saw a ghost. I didn't see a UFO.
Was it creep when this ghost appeared at the window? What was your emotional reaction?
Surprise.
Yeah.
I didn't. I wasn't afraid. It was just, I thought, huh. Who is shocked at first? Who is this guy? And I could just see him just as plain. I could tell that he was a spirit of some kind because I could almost see through him. But I could tell he wasn't solid. But he had a plaid up at the sleeves. He had a little bit of a mustache, dark curly hair, looked to be about maybe early to mid 30s. I could make out exactly. I could still see him in my mind today. I mean, there he was standing and he was looking at me confused. All I could figure is somewhere along the way, maybe there was somebody up there cutting wood, a lumberjack, and he died. And for whatever, he was shocked to see me and I was shocked to see him. But and then the other experience I had was when my father passed away in 2002. He had a heart attack while my brother and I were on the 2002 Roswell dig, and we were going to fly back. And then he got out of the hospital, and so we stayed on the dig. They said they were sending him home. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks later, he did pass away. I live in Missouri, and he's in California. But I was holding his hand. I made it in time, probably an hour before he passed. I think he was actually waiting for me and for Chuck to get there. Chuck's in Colorado, and I was holding his hand when he passed away. I was telling him just, to take deep breaths and just, he was gasping for air. But that night I went, when my dad had this thing that when I would come and visit, my mom would hug me and brothers and sisters, but my dad would always tap me on the shoulder 3 times. He'd go, "How you doing, daughter?" And I'd say, "Doing real good, Dad." Well, I went back that night and took a shower and went to bed and rolled over on my side, and I felt 3 taps on my shoulder. And I turned on the light, thought I could see Dad there, but it wasn't. But I felt 3 taps on my shoulders. I guess Dad was saying goodbye.
Oh. I had a similar experience when my dad died. I was attending and basically helped him over, I hope. That was my intention, at least, as a metaphysicist, which shocked him. He couldn't speak because he was dying of... But he couldn't speak, which had to have been the most frustrating thing for him ever, because he liked conversation and was a deep thinker, that kind of thing. But after he expired, we all went back to, it was about 7 a.m, and the relatives who had assembled were very tired and distraught, of course. And we went back to our motel rooms and crashed. And I had the distinct feeling that my dad, in spirit, had come to the motel room, which I was sharing with my youngest nephew, who was very upset by all this, of course. And my dad knew that I'm okay with, I'm not happy that he's gone, but we had made our peace. And he wanted to check in on my nephew. And then he left. And to my knowledge, he has, my instruction to him, my encouragement to him was, when you cross over on this great adventure, you're going to see all the people you've missed on the earth plane, because they're all going to be there. Your mother and your aunts and these people and those people who had already died, best friends of yours, basically, and people who really, really love you. So don't fear this. And this gets back to Chip's article, where don't fear the unknown necessarily. Embrace it. Look forward to it. At least you're going to be leaving this shell of a body that doesn't serve you anymore. And put into that perspective, yeah, we'll miss you, but your second wife, who loves you very much, will be joining you shortly enough, because she's elderly too. I mean, I didn't say this to him at the time, but I'm thinking all this, and all this stuff is psychic, and it does transmute. Whatever he was thinking, I will probably never know when he expired, but he did come visit, and then he was off and away. Thank goodness he's not a ghost, because he'd be a cantankerous ghost. That would not be pleasant.
I have a
Oh,
question. I have
go
a
ahead.
question for Chip.
Yeah.
Chip, when when your friend passed away and you had that experience, did that give you a different perspective on life and I mean death? I mean, your article it said it kind of did, but I imagine before that, maybe being a kid, you didn't have that much fear of death. But I know after the experience with my dad, I don't have a fear of death anymore because I know there is something beyond, and we all hope for that. But when you have an experience like that, did that affect you in that way?
It was more of a shock to the system, and oddly enough, not the death. This was my first encounter with death, and being almost 21, or just turning, and to have that first experience with the death of somebody that close is really, really super fortunate. I don't really know that many people, if any, that I've met that at 21 had not had that kind of thing. But nobody said that's what death was like. Nobody. And you couldn't talk in 1979. You couldn't talk about that stuff. I couldn't tell my parents. The big killer was I couldn't tell his parents for over 10 years. They were very traditionally religious. I had to say, because in addition to that, they were in very, very deep grief. And there's the irony, and it's like, Chip, tell them, and they wouldn't have heard me. And when I finally told that they gave him the one thing he wanted more than anything else, they didn't say, why didn't you say that earlier? You could have saved us all this. No, they were, and God bless them. They were like, thank you for waiting as long as you did, because we wouldn't have heard it.
Yeah.
But it also, because nobody said that's what death or dying was like, or afterlife or anything. They didn't even consider that stuff. And so it started the decades of this underground kind of network. You find spirit mediums, people that talk to the dead, but they couldn't talk about that stuff out loud. They didn't want anybody to know that's what they were doing, aside from circus fairs or something where they dress in these elaborate, Karnak the Magnificent type bells, books, and candles thing where, the outfit is doing more talking than the psychic himself. No, don't tell anybody this, So it was this really on my own, this underground network of stuff. And if there were paranormalists, they were in big cities and untouchable, and they didn't want to talk to you. They didn't want to hear from you. So, yeah, this was a kind of a tough thing. But what I have learned over the years, two things, and I wanted to comment on your lumberjack because it's odd that you marked that he had the confused look, because a lot of times when I have seen spirit, not apparitions per se, but spirit, when and it has, I don't know what it is, timing or lighting or magnetic frequency, or being exceptional or what, but when you do see them, oftentimes I've seen the confused expressions on their faces too. And I found over the years, there was a time period of about 7 years through this 40-year path when I did have the ability to see and speak to dead people. And I didn't expect that. And that's for a whole other day altogether. But in my 40 years, what I have learned is one thing with regard to the confused look is a lot of these spirits don't know they're dead. That is, maybe some people estimate up to 90% of them don't know they're dead, And sometimes when you see stuff fly across a room, or you see those scratches that people get that they call the devil's triangle, and they had all this feared stuff too, is imagine if you're in spirit and you don't know you're dead. Nobody that you talk to every day looks at you, sees you, recognizes you're even in the room, talks about you. It's kind of like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense, kind of like, how come you can't hear me? And so when somebody does, when somebody with their Jetsons equipment, space age equipment, sees you, they're like, oh my God, somebody can see me, somebody can hear me, oh my God. And then if you ever watch these TV shows, they stop this communication and start focusing on their equipment. Dude, did you see what my meters are doing? It's like, no, talk. But the spirit is like, wait, what happened? How come, what? You saw me and now you're not talking. Wait a minute. That's where a lot of times scratches come from, or stuff moves across the room on its own, because it's not malicious. It's like almost desperate. Oh my God, you could see me. Help me, please help me. They don't know they're dead. Most of the time, many people don't consider that.
Or they don't want to accept the fact they're dead. And in the metaphysics that I studied, we called such entities earthbound.
Mm-hmm.
They're earthbound. They have unfinished business on earth. They are confused as to why they are not in a body anymore. They want back in. They don't know how. In fact, it's impossible. And that is what's behind the majority of hauntings, especially noisy and negative ones. But again, as you pointed out in your article, Chip, if people would approach with curiosity rather than condemnation, and a person doesn't have to be dead for that either, disincarnate, but if we would approach everybody that way, living or dead, what a better world it would be. Hence the golden rule that every civilization has. Do unto others as you would have done unto you.
Yeah, it's
basic human decency, apparently.
Human decency, and and it's there regardless of what the media tells you. You see acts of kindness around you every day, even in times like these. But the like when in those 7 years of mediumship, there were a lot of times these earthbound spirits. The ones that you see on the paranormal shows generally are the earthbound spirits. People who have died and crossed over, gone into the light, so to speak. They don't need to manifest. They basically in their, but there are a lot of different reasons. I used to cross over spirits, earthbound spirits, with their permission, of course. I wouldn't go into a place, full on, priest or shaman and force them. No, I would consult with them. So oftentimes people were suicides, and they absolutely stringently believed that they broke God's law, so they weren't eligible for the light. Okay. And there was a process to that. We talked about the Council of Nicaea in 350 AD with Roman Emperor Constantine, and how some of these things that made it into the newer books were political. And I'm not going to go into that in detail. But there are things that, and that's the thing about suicide. You watch murder shows or suicides. It's a single moment that you can never take back again, whether it's a murder or a suicide. One single moment. What you elect to do in that moment is irretrievable. You can't change that. You broke the egg, you can't unbreak the egg. Talk about an entropy, a metaphysical law of entropy. But there are ways to find the light, regardless. And I just wanted to remark something else about Debbie and you with the stories of your father. There are things that we call affirmations that are extremely common, but people just aren't aware of. Signs. Signs, that's so metaphysical. Sometimes if you really are missing someone near and dear to you that you lost, and you're thinking about them, if you find a feather on the ground or a penny just out of place, or if you see certain patterns, 222 every time you look at the clock, or 1111, smells that can only remind you of them. My wife's dad was smoked a pipe. He had these burgundy cherry tobacco, so it wasn't just a pipe smoke, it was burgundy cherry pipe tobacco that my wife and I could smell, years after he passed, and like wafting around little pockets of the room, you smell that, you go, that's Dad, Aunt Judy, it was baked goods, but the chocolate chip cookies, just the way that she baked them. So there are these affirmations that arrive, and if you are aware of them, then it's more than likely you'll see them. It's a beautiful part of the grieving process is answers, but the answers are there if you look. Just wanted to say that.
That was a really splendid article, and you brought an interesting point of view that we don't get very often, which is not a Pollyanna point of view. You're not saying that every paranormal phenomenon is positive, but what you are saying is that to sell newspapers and get eyeballs on video, people tend to sensationalize, and we are seeing that going on to some extent in current events. I don't want to segue in that direction. I do want to segue into Debbie's article.
Yep,
because
sounds like
I can't
a great
wait
segue
to
me
hear.
too.
Well, I can wait. I don't have to wait very long, I hope. Debbie Ziegelmeier's with us on Taboo Topics with Gene Broida. It's our March 22nd edition. We have Chip Reichenthal as well. Thank you for tuning in. Debbie, what are you going to bring to Taboo Topics today?
Well, since you were talking about Rendlesham being the, I guess the European or the English Roswell, and I've spent so much time at Roswell, I gave up counting how many times I'd been there when I hit 20. So, and this has been since 2001, I believe. So I was gonna read a real quick article by T.J. Keller, which was in the MUFON Journal back in November of 2018, a decade after Roswell, because a lot of people get Roswell confused. When I went on TV briefly during the whole Area 51 thing, and told people here locally on the local news at 8 in the morning, do not go to Area 51. You know, that's not a good thing. Don't try and crash the gate. And people were saying, well, Area 51 is at Roswell. No, Roswell is Roswell, New Mexico. Area 51 is in Nevada. It's two totally separate events, two totally separate places, but just a quick background then of what Roswell was. This is a decade after Roswell. According to recent accounts, there were 2, possibly 3 ETs, extraterrestrial intelligence craft, that crashed in the general vicinity of Roswell, St. Augustine, New Mexico, in July 1947. They were brought down, according to various reports, by one or more radar stations located near the Four Corners area, Colorado intersect. This is near the town of Aztec, New Mexico. Based on testimony, American radar technology at the time interfered with ET navigation systems and caused the crashes. Shortly thereafter, Glenn Dennis, the mortician from Ballard's funeral home in Roswell, was informed that there needed to be, though there'd been a military aircraft crash. He proceeded to Roswell Army Air Force Base to perform his contracted work. Therefore, he was informally told by an RAAF, Roswell Army Air Force Base, nurse to leave immediately due to the ongoing recovery and examination of deceased ETs. Later, he met the nurse at a restaurant and explained the urgency and drew a sketch of the ET. The nurse drew a sketch of the ET beings that had been recovered and autopsied. Dennis later redrew the sketch as shown, and they have a little picture of it, which he actually drew for me, and noted that the beings had 4 fingers and that they had what appeared to be small suction cups on their fingertips. 2 days after the Roswell crash, Sunday, July 6th, Major Philip Corsell was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and doing his normal inspections of the base that night, he encountered Master Sergeant Bill Brown, a bowling team colleague who alerted him to a cargo shipment from Fort Bliss, Texas, on its way to Wright Field in Ohio. Ultimately, it was shipped to Walter Reed Hospital. Normally, cargo went from Wright Field to Fort Bliss. Upon inspecting a previous open container in the veterinary building, Corsell saw a glass container containing thick, light blue liquid. It was a coffin, in Corsell's own words. It was a 4-foot human-shaped figure with arms, bizarre-looking 6-fingered hands. He said, I didn't see a thumb, thin legs and feet, and an oversized that looked like it was floating over a balloon gondola for a chin. I know I must have cringed at first, but then I had the urge to pull off the top of the liquid container and touch the pale gray skin. But I couldn't tell whether or not it was skin because it looked like very thin one-piece head-to-toe fabric covering the creature's flesh. So this was an article that he just told about how there were actually beings that were that had crashed. The reason that I read that article was because, yes, there were beings. I spoke to a lot of people in the Roswell area. Don Schmidt, the lead investigator, is a good friend of mine. He's investigated over 150 witnesses. I've been in the hangar and had a gentleman who called himself Eli Eli said this is where it's Hangar 84 in Roswell, which the airport is now opened up to commercial airlines. I flew American Airline in and out of there. But he said this is where the debris was, and there were 3 beings, and they were laying up against the wall over there in that direction. So, yes, we do know that there were actual beings that were recovered. And in fact, Glenn Dennis, I became friends with Glenn Dennis. Let's see, I'm not sure. He hasn't been around the museum, and I'm not sure if he has. He was the mortician at the Ballard, at the Ballard funeral home. And Glenn Dennis took me into his office back in, I believe it was 2002, and told me the same story about how the nurse, he called her Nurse Self, had described to him the beings that she'd seen. She opened the door, and they were examining this being there on the base, and it had suction cup fingers, and he drew the fingers, he drew the head, and he said, and this is what she did, and he said she took the napkin she drew it on, she lit a match to it and put it in a glass of water. Now, he personally told me that. I also talked to Walter Hott. Walter Hott also was a friend before he passed away, and he also told me of how Colonel Blanchard had told him to go on ahead and release this information to Frank Joyce there at the radio station. And I also became very good friends with Jesse Marcel Sr. had come home and at about 1 a.m. and woke him up and said, we found pieces of debris. You need to see this. And you probably can't see it real well, but this is a little replica that Jesse made. He only made about, I think it was 100 of them that he sold, and it's got the little symbols on it. And then the next day he had to come and take it back. He said, Dad said, we're not to say anything. He said he sat, these 2 officers came, sat him and his mom down. He said, I was 11 years old, and they said, you're a military family. You're not allowed to say anything. You have to keep this quiet. And that was kind of the end of it. So, yes, there was a crash. Yes, there were deceased beings from another world. And yes, there's been a cover-up. And had it not been for, I believe it was 1978 when Stanton Friedman received the information. He was on a talk show and someone called in and said, did you know about Roswell? And he was able to contact Jesse Marcel Sr. and interview him, that if it had not been for Stanton Friedman, who just recently, I guess he passed away, was it been April or May of last year
we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary.
Yeah, had it not been for Stanton Friedman, we never would know the details and how much actually went on there in the cover-up of Roswell.
Wasn't that nurse disappeared, like we were talking about?
Well, supposedly. But what I found out later through research was that, no, she didn't disappear, that Glenn had made up the name and said Nurse Self, and they had said that she had flown to, they were going to fly her out of the country someplace, and that the plane had gone down and she was killed. But what I found out years later was that she never left town, that she went ahead, she stayed there on the base. He kept her name secret, and they made up the story about her leaving town and being killed in a plane accident and a plane crash, and that she was still there for years later. She was still in the Roswell area, so that she didn't leave. He was protecting her identity, for telling. He also told me the story about how when he showed up on the base, because he said, well, I heard about all this, and he said, and I went down there, and they called and they wanted hermetically sealed child-sized coffins. He thought, oh my gosh, a plane has gone down, a military plane, children were killed. And they asked I asked him how many they needed, and he said, well, he said, what do you have? The officer said, what do you have? And he said, well, I've got 3. I've got 1 on display, and I can get a 5th one. And they said, okay, that would be fine. Well, my brother Chuck Zukowski and I had done some research, and there were supposedly 2 craft that hit and went in opposite directions. One of them, there's kind of a discrepancy as to where that one went down, but they're apparently closer to what we call the Ragsdale site, the Boy Scout camp. There were two alive there. I mean, two dead and one alive. One still alive. The other three were dead at the debris field that my brother Chuck and I did the archaeology digs at the location in 2002 and again in 2006. That when the crash happened, we did the archaeology digs on the skip site, so they had skipped. So this craft came down and it hit the hillside and skipped and went up and dropped debris, and about 2.5 miles away from the major portion of the debris that Mac Brazel had found, there were a couple bodies there, and they found a third body when they found the craft. So we thought, okay, so they've got 3 there, and they've got 2 other and 1 alive at a different location. And so we thought, well, what Glenn had told us was that he basically had access to 5 coffins, and he said, do you need any more? And they said no. We thought that would probably verify that there were a total of 3 and 3. As far as debris, we found a piece of debris in 2002. We were doing this for Sci-Fi, at the time Sci-Fi, which was NBC. They didn't expect us to find anything on this. It was kind of a lead-in to our TV special that Sci-Fi was doing for this TV show that was called Taken at the time. And it was kind of a 5-part series, I believe, but this was the lead-in for it. They thought that they would take Don Schmidt and Tom Carey down there, and they around all these archaeologists, these volunteer archaeologists. When we went down there, kind of secretly coded emails at the time. They said, we can't talk about anything. We were given maybe a month's notice to go down there at our own expense. We met at the Roswell Museum there in Roswell, and Dr. Bill Dolman, the lead archaeologist from Albuquerque, New Mexico of Albuquerque, at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, gave us what you would call a crash course in archaeology. And then he took us out there. He chalkboarded everything, was telling us all about archaeology and how to do it and how everything is documented. Took us out the next day. We followed him out. He had a big van full of archaeologists and all the equipment, and we started our digs and came up with a small triangle piece. The piece stayed for a couple years. It was all property of the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And after a couple years, Chuck was able to get the piece, sign it out. It was very, very pure aluminum with a little bit of silicon. And then later on, he received the piece again and was sent off to Bigelow Industries, and there was a polymer that they couldn't identify. And what's left of it is still back there, someplace in a museum.
Did you say a polymer?
Yeah, I think that it was a polymer, they said, that was unidentified.
Right, unknown to Earth.
Unknown
context, or unknown to anything, probably.
Well, that was the first email we got, which I still have a copy of. And then later on, when we said, wow, Bigelow Industries should be able to identify everything.
Right.
And they said, nah, we really didn't really say that. And Chuck said, we've got the email that said you did. It's quite interesting. We found a few other artifacts, traces of what may or may not have been parts of military boot or. But this particular piece of silver metallic, just small triangle, was found at about 10 centimeters of dirt, about 4 inches of dirt, which at the time Dr. Dolman said would be where, in 2002, would be where 1947 dirt would be.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well, that's exciting to actually find something.
And there are still there's another one I can't remember his name, but I know his first name is Frank. He's a geologist that's been out there in the debris fields, and he's still finding pieces of some type of metal.
Wow.
At the time, there was a huge storm that went on, and what had happened was that there was a storm, there was lightning, they had radar, the microwave radar. So they would take a couple trucks and they would shoot this radar back and forth, and it would cut out engines. It would, plane engines, and combustion engines. It would also burn birds, and it wasn't a very friendly radar. They didn't have a lot of it, but we had the basically we that's where we had the atomic bombs ready on the runway, ready to go. Was there at Roswell Army Air Force Base. That was, the cream of the crop that were there. That was who was on standby in case, gosh forbid, the president made that phone call. So they wanted to make sure they knew exactly who was coming into our airspace and when and where, and they had picked up something apparently that was unidentified and shot this radar at it during a storm. And for what I guess between, it's all speculation, but the nearest we can figure is that there were two craft and they collided. One went in one direction, one went in the other. And the next day, Mac Brazel, who was the foreman of the Proctor Ranch, went out to check on the sheep. The funny thing about sheep is they're really stupid. If there's a storm, a lightning storm, if there's any kind of a storm, and it's raining, sheep will get underneath other sheep to get out, and they'll pile 3-4 high. And if you don't go out as soon as you can and check on the sheep, the ones in the bottom will suffocate. So the ranchers go out first thing in the morning, first light, and check on the sheep. Cows, in case of a brush fire. Now, we went out there in the 2006 dig, and I believe they had lost 80 head of sheep that had died in a fire, in a brush fire, because they all went up against the fence and burned up. Cows, you'll see them in a storm, they'll be walking along the fence line. So that was the reasoning for Mac Brazel when he found the debris.
At the one site.
At the one site, at the skip site. And
the one people who look into this sort of stuff know about.
The storm had, and then the reason there's probably still debris there because it was a huge storm and it scattered debris. They were picking up debris for a quarter of a mile.
Wow.
This stuff, lightweight pieces. They found the main structure, the main craft, what was left, but it's sprung or spewed out debris. That's why there could possibly still be something there. They were picking it up at the time. They had soldiers walking shoulder to shoulder, and they were using metal detectors, which were made to find landmines. So they weren't made to find anything that was too deep. And when we thought it was kind of funny because we went out there with metal detectors in 2002, and we knew that we had better metal detectors than they had in 1947 that the military had. So we were out there with metal detectors trying to pick up stuff, but where they were found a piece of debris a couple years later, and it was in a sinkhole. That eventually disappeared. He got to bragging about it, and that was the only thing that was missing out of his house when his house was broke into. There's still a lot going on in Roswell. Chuck and I have been out there several times. We speak out there. Several times we've been speakers for the festival, and we've had our own few interesting experiences while we've been out there. So there's things. The area is still active. It's Roswell is not old news. Things are still happening in Roswell.
I have heard about this radar weapon to bring down UFOs, and it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. Thanks for sharing that. As researchers, a lot of the information we come across dovetails, and it stands to reason when you're going to as much source material as you possibly can. Chip, you're awfully quiet over there. What do you think about all this Roswell stuff?
Oh, I love it. I think it's great. I think the thing that stuck out most to me was the description of from the mortician about the skin being more like fabric than anything. He didn't really want to touch it because he thought maybe it was fabric, and that goes into endless discussions I'm sure y'all have had about whether these grays are actual beings or if they're some sort of artificial intelligent robotic type of you know, it's just like from the human perspective, because we don't seem to handle space radiation too well. You would think by the time we're going out really exploring, it would be some artificial intelligent kind of beings we'd create that could handle, you know, that level of radiation and everything that the deep space could handle. So, you know, that's what stuck out to me. You know, I've seen a few people that there were a couple of military guys that were tasked with cleanup, and they couldn't talk about this stuff. I saw one of these really exclusive, highly classified type of videos where these guys are talking about it. You know, almost akin to the deathbed confessions that
Right.
you know we hear about. You know, and they were crying. You know, at the things that they saw, the things that they remembered, and the fact that they couldn't share this with their wives and children. They couldn't share this with their best buddies. They couldn't share this with other people on the same military task force, if you will, that they were on. You know,
It's exactly the kind of trauma I was talking about earlier that I introduced every show with.
Yeah.
That people are suffering psychologically from this decades-long cover-up.
In fact, one of the couples that was there on the 2002 dig was Nancy Easley Johnston and her husband. Colonel Easley was he was the one. I don't know. I think it was Major Easley was the one that cordoned off the area. That was his job, to cordon off the quarter-mile area. And she said she always asked him what happened. She'd heard about Roswell years after, of course. And she said, "Daddy, I know you were there." And basically on his deathbed, she asked him that. She said, "What did you see, Daddy?" And he said, "Creatures. I saw creatures." So he kept that all the way to his deathbed. But from what Jesse had told us, that he said, I was 11 and they had these big soldiers that came in, and then these men in suits, and he said, "We were told, you do not tell." Now you figure 1947, that's 2 years after World War II. People were very patriotic. Your government said, "Don't you talk." You don't talk. I mean,
That's right, because loose lips sink ships.
Exactly.
And there was trust in government
They did.
at the time.
Government, and they didn't say anything. They said, "This is family." And I was watching the other night, and it's the same way. They're a family. They are a family within, and you have a lot of the people that came back. They're from, in that area. The people on the base, they're a family within. And when they said, "You don't talk, you don't talk," and Jesse didn't, and he said, "I never said a word until my dad came out and started talking to Stanton Friedman." The man was wonderful. He was, I believe, 68 years old, and he went back into the military. They commissioned him again at 68. He did 2 tours of duty on a helicopter, Jesse Marcel Jr., 2 tours of duty on a helicopter as a flight surgeon. And he said when they would take, they'd go and pick up somebody that was injured, the Gulf War, when he was the one in the helicopter with the gun, protecting them. He was, I guess, there in case they got shot at. And when I saw him, the last time I saw him, he had braces on his legs from the knees to the ankles from being in that helicopter, from crouching down. I remember the second time he came back, when he came back in between his tours of duty, where his helmet was on his head was rubbed raw around here where the helmet had shifted back and forth. And I said, "Jesse, why are you still, you're 68. He goes, he was a doctor. And they needed flight surgeons. And so that's how much of a military family they are, that he still fulfilled his duty that many years later at that age.
It's a big deal.
Jesse Marcel Jr. he was a wonderful, kind-hearted man. And he said he saw pieces of debris. He held them in his hand.
There is so much more that we could talk about Roswell. It's one of the chapters in my book. One thing I did want to touch on before we do our shout outs, because the time has flown by once again here on Taboo Topics with Gene Broida, with my illustrious guests. Debbie Ziegelmeyer and Chip Reichenthal. I wondered if either of you is familiar with a book called The Alien Interview. It is supposed to be a transcript taken by a nurse who was present when they brought in a surviving alien, seemingly from Roswell, at about the time of Roswell, and perhaps from this Roswell crash, what you just described, Debbie. And that the military wanted to interrogate this prisoner of war, basically. They're treating this alien as a prisoner of war, and they are assuming that it's hostile and has forces behind it, and have prepared lists of questions to ask it, and it refuses to talk to anybody except this female nurse, and it communicates telepathically with her. And and then there's a whole book of basically the history of everything. This alien says, here's what you humans need to know. Let's begin at the beginning with the formation of Earth and how Earth was formed. And I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, because I was riveted. I read it one summer. It was the summer of 2017. I couldn't put it down. And I'd like to make an audiobook of it. I think it's terribly important. I plan to contact the publisher and see if I can't get a copy, bring this out, because it's an incredible story. It really is. And for me as a human origins person, how this narrative interfaces with the Sumerian narratives and other myths about human origin on Earth. Myths are typically rooted in facts or memories. They don't just spring up out of nowhere, as mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists would have you believe. There is a basis for all this stuff. In those days, there were giants, says the Bible. We're finding skeletons of giants. So when I read a book like Alien Interview, I understand as a skeptic, this could be hooey and hokum. This could be a good fiction. But again, intuitively, it rings true. A lot of it rings really true. So it could be the topic. That one book could be the topic of a whole 2-3 hour discussion right there.
It's about David and Goliath.
Exactly. Oh, many accounts of in the Bible, and I'm no Bible freak, but my Bible student, I should say. My mother told me everybody should read the Bible. Everybody, right?
One of them is the Bible.
Yeah, and
So I have a Bible saying
it talks about lands where giants dwelled.
Exactly.
And in the context of don't even go there. Just don't go there, because just giants, and you'd be nuts to go hang out. You know, and the family was traveling, or the tribe was traveling, and they had to go near the place where the giants live. And, the giants were horrible, apparently. And the story I've heard, which I tend to believe, is that after they were created as a hybrid offspring of the Anunnaki and humans that they bred with, some genetics experiment gone horribly wrong, they had ravenous appetites. They were huge. And they ate all the wildlife first. Then they ate domesticated crops, which humans were just getting into. And then when they ate all of that, they started eating humans. They'd eaten all the animals, they'd eaten all the food, all the vegetables. Now they're going to eat the humans. And that's where the Anunnaki stepped in and said, no. We went to a lot of trouble to make these humans. You're not just going to destroy them. And precipitated a cleansing of the earth through flood. Now, that's a lot to process, and there's a lot of stories interwoven there. But I like to challenge people with connecting the dots.
Noah's Ark.
Right. And why did the Bible spend so much time tracing lineages? I went to my mom when I started reading Genesis. I said, there's all this begatting going on. Whoosy Poosy begat so-and-so, and they begat them, and they begat them. Who cares? Well, she didn't have a ready answer, right? But now, as a scientist, I know a geneticist would care about that stuff. That's what they were doing. They were tracing lineages back to rootstock. That's my theory. That's my theory.
Yeah, my wife always has a question if we have anybody even remotely involved with biblical talk when they come on the show, and origins. Is okay, so Adam comes from dust. Eve comes from Adam's rib. You had a couple of kids, you know, one got killed, the other was set off to populate the world. Where are all the women at? That's what my wife wants to know. So I always honor my wife by asking that question anytime that topic comes up. It's a good question. She's gone to churches and tried to get answers, gone to theologians, you know. Nobody's quite answered it yet. So maybe I'll have to check out that alien interview book, you know.
I recommend it.
Yeah, I've seen some things on YouTube, you know, where there might be offshoots of that particular book. I'm not sure, where they do have interviews, quote unquote, with extraterrestrial life forms that go into interesting detail about origins and things of that nature. Maybe it could be an offshoot of that. I don't know, but I'm going to check that book out. You've piqued my curiosity here, Gene.
Oh, me too.
Well, coolio. And by the way, we are now in the home stretch of this March 22nd, 2020 episode of Taboo Topics with Gene Broida. Chip Reichenthal, how can people contact you? And please extol yourself shamelessly. Promote yourself here.
Yes, this shameless self-promotion here. Well, you can find me on Facebook if you can spell my name. I think it's listed on here, but it's Reichenthal, Reich, like the Third Reich. I hate to use that comparison, but that's the one. Reichenthal, Chip. And Twitter. Also, under my old band name, Victims of Retail. Retail when the band came. Almost got signed, but that's for another day. 2 radio shows currently. Mine is called Kindness Beyond the Veil, where we take a kinder look at the paranormal, supernatural, extraterrestrial, metaphysical, psychic, and alternative healing realms. It is Mondays. We have a live show for each of the major networks that carry it. 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern on Mondays on UPRN, talkradio.com. That's United Public Radio Network. And 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Mondays on WCET-FM. It's late night in the Midlands Radio Network at WCETFM.com. And Paranormal Junkyard Radio at ParanormalJunkyard.com. And we're on the Paranormal Radio app via TalkStream Live. So you can hear that live. And Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Same time slot as Gene's in here, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Tuesdays and Thursdays for Supernatural Realms, a show I co-host with my buddy Tim Roxbury. And we cover a wider view on all those realms, paranormal, supernatural, extraterrestrial, etc. So Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, you can find some Chip. And 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Mondays on UPRNTalkRadio.com as well. I have a book called Even the Dead Won't Tell You the Truth. I have to check that out. Best book you'll never read. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So you can find it there and on Facebook too. And Kindness Beyond the Veil has its own Facebook page where we'd love for you to like us on Facebook.
Chip is an excellent show host. I recommend all of his shows to anybody who would like to pass some time learning interesting things and hanging out with groovy people. Debbie, how can people contact you and shout yourself out here?
Wow. Well, I still work full-time, and I'm still a full-time investigator. So I have 2 books in me that people have been trying to get me to finish, and I haven't. So my books aren't out. I don't do FaceTime. I just signed up for Twitter last night. Facebook or FaceTime. My email is mufondiver@gmail.com, and that's about it. And I'm out there in the field, so I'm really hard to get a hold of. But if you need me, you can get a hold of me through MUFON headquarters, MUFON.com. They'll pass anything along to me. My name, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, P.O. Box 181, Imperial, Missouri, 63052. And you can mail me pictures to have analyzed or reports, but contact me, MUFONdiver@gmail.com. But I am still an active researcher and investigator, and I'm in the field. So I don't have time for books or anything else. I spend all my nights researching, and
that's what I love about you, because you're so hands-on, Debbie.
I am so hands-on that I don't have time to be people on, but I actually, if you have a report, file it. MUFON.com, file your sighting report. Especially if it's in Missouri, it'll come straight to me. If it's in another state, go straight to one of our other investigators. But we encourage everybody, if you have a sighting report, go on MUFON.com and file your reports there and let us know, because every report, no matter how old, is important. We're still trying to find hot spots, and right now Missouri wore out. Lack of sleep from there's so much going on here right now. That's a whole nother show.
Thanks so much. I say this every show, and I'm going to say it again. I couldn't do a show like this without you guys. I invite all of our viewers and people in the audience to check out my book on Amazon, Unknown Objects, the Top 10 U.S. UFO Cases. You can find my daily scribblings on thedailyconspiracy.com and survival.update and several other sites that I shall not name here for the sake of time. But I write as Lightworker 111. I have a website that needs some repair, it looks like. I went there the other day, and lo and behold, there's a server error. But normally, www.lightwork111.com is up and going for some more promotion of things that I write. Let's see, I've got this new show called Taboo Topics with Gene Broida, Sunday night, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time zone, with fabulous guest panelists who come in and read articles, and then we kick them around the round table. And it's just awesome. And really, it's thanks to knowledgeable and engaging personalities such as Debbie and Chip that a show like this gets 1,000 viewers last week when it's pretty much fresh out of the gate. This is a new show. We're getting through our growing pains. It's all good. And any final words, Debbie or Chip, before I take us out of here?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it, and anytime. I appreciate. Thank you, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah, same sentiment here. Just to throw something else in for all the people that find themselves stuck at home for that thing that we managed not to talk about today. Thank you. Just stay calm. That's it. Stay calm.
Agreed.
Worry about this thing if or when it happens to you. Heaven forbid, but not before.
You know, we did manage not to talk about it, and that was part of my purpose tonight. People need distraction, in my opinion.
We really do. I wholeheartedly agree. But, so
be
nobody's
safe.
telling them to stay calm, so I figured I'd get that in.
Be safe, be calm, be positive, be helpful, be kind and loving. Everybody out there tuning in, thank you so much for being with us. That's our take on it. Thank you for listening to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida at tabootopics.life/shows. On my YouTube channel, Taboo Topics with Gene Broida. Please subscribe to that. And if you click the little bell to the right of the subscribe button, you'll get periodic reminders when we are live streaming. And I want to shout out especially Global Enlightenment Radio Network. You guys rock my world, simulcasting my show and bringing slews of viewers. I can't wait to meet all of them. As far as I'm concerned, they're future friends. All of you out there are my future friends. You can contact me, Gene, at lightwork111.com. That is our take on it. Over and out.
One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment.